Hello everyone, my name is Lance Timberwolf, and I'm here today to share with you my top 7 tips for CPU optimization in OBS. Now, when I first started to stream, I was maxing out my CPU to barely even attempt to stream a game, and it wasn't working out so well. So with a lot of assistance and trimming down and really optimizing things, I've got stuff to where I actually can stream at a decent level. So I want to share my top 7 with you. And now some of these might not apply to some of you because you might be running perfectly fine at 1080p, and so you can skip any of these that really don't make sense for you and just move on to the next one if you want to tweak things a little bit more, fine-tune your OBS settings. But for me, all of these are absolutely required, and I know that some of you, don't have the most optimal equipment, so you're kind of in the same boat. So the first thing is scale everything to 720p. 1080p uses 4 times the amount of pixels that 720p does. So that is 4 times as much processing power as 720. Tune everything down. It will really help the load off of your CPU. This is one of the things that was the biggest game changer for me. And then my last one is at tip number 1. So scale everything to 720p. That means your canvas. That means your alerts. That means your overlays, all of your graphics that you have, everything. Change all of that to 720p and it will help a lot. Next, when you're streaming a game, if you stream games, use game capture. That will also, of course, tell OBS that, hey, I'm streaming a game, so OBS goes, oh, okay, I know how to encode that a little bit better than if I was just using display capture like I'm doing right now. So that will further just help with the load, as well as give you a couple of more options of what to fine-tune inside OBS, its settings in general. And if you are using display capture, sometimes you end up capturing things that you don't want to. Like, I purposely have my system dock up right now, but you might not want to display that sometimes, or you might have other things behind there that you just, it's kind of a no holds barred, you can see everything behind the curtain if you use a display. So use game capture. Not only does it protect you from unwanted things being shown, but it also helps OBS encode things better. Next, use an overlay manager like Stream Elements or Streamlabs. Those will really help combine a lot of your sources all into one convenient thing and really help your CPU load as well. So that way OBS doesn't have to take all of these elements and compile them all together when it's, streaming it out. You've got one single source from either Streamlabs or Stream Elements, and that way OBS goes, oh, okay, one single thing, I can handle that a lot easier. Now with those as well, if we're sticking with the rest of our tips that we were just talking about, you want to make sure that all of those are in 720p. For example, Stream Elements default is 1080p, so you want to make sure that you have to go in there and go to your edits, change it to 720p, and then rearrange everything for your canvas size. And know if you have a overlay that is currently at 1080p and you just scale it down in OBS, that does not work. It doesn't save as much CPU as you think it does. It's still 1080p, it's just squished, so it still requires the same amount of processing power. So when I mean scale everything to 720p, I mean scale everything to 720p. That goes, back to our first tip. It is absolutely required if you're going to save every single bit of CPU that you can, like I have to. Next, use static elements for your things. Like, for example, you see my cam bar right here? This is static. It's not moving, it's not animated, and it's scaled to 720p. So any of your other static elements that you have, or elements that you have, make them static. So I know that animated stuff is really cool looking and adds that extra little flair, but if you're trying to save CPU, that's one of the things that has to go. So, for example, if you have an alert or something like that are, in your overlay that has a whole lot of animation to it, it will hog up a lot of CPU, but if it's just an alert, then it will go away after a few seconds and hopefully your CPU stabilizes. But if it's something constant, like a cam bar, then it will constantly use up a lot of CPU. And as much as I'd like to use them, I can't, so it might be something that you want to look into as well. Next, use good lighting for your setup. I've got a couple of really good lights pointed in just the right directions, and it gives me some decent soft light that's not super harsh and casting a whole bunch of shadows, and it helps with my green screen behind me, which, of course, there is one. And what that does is by having good lighting, it helps your camera see you better. And when your camera can see you better and interpret your data easier, it's a lot less load on your CPU as well. So if you have a dim room with not a whole lot of lights, your camera has to work harder to interpret what it sees. So by having plenty of good lighting, then your CPU works less, your camera understands you easier, and it helps with any camera lag you have too. Like mine is pretty on sync. It's pretty quick, as you can see. So if you have lower lighting, invest in some decent LED light bulbs. They're not too expensive. They're like $2.75, I think mine were, per each, and I have like 3 of them. So that's not too bad. So if you got $10 to spare, get some good lighting, and it will not only improve the way you look, but also improve your CPU usage. 2 birds with 1 stone. Finally, one of my final points, you want to use hardware encoding. Now, this is more in particular to my setup, but it might be to yours. When I got my laptop, I got a increased CPU, or a higher CPU than I normally did. It normally came with like an i5 or something, and I got an Intel Core i7 with my laptop. And yes, I am streaming from a laptop, which is why I need to use all of these tips myself. So my CPU core is pretty good, and I also got an upgraded graphics card along with it. So hardware encoding works for me. It might not work for you. You want to play around with it, switch it to one or switch it back to the other to see which one works for you best. But hardware encoding works for me the best, and it might work for you if you're having problems with CPU overload. So give it a try. And it's just in your settings over here. And there it goes eventually. Let's see, stream, output, encoder right there, hardware. I'm using hardware encoder, and that's what saves me a lot. So it might help you. Give it a try. See what you get. Now finally, one of the biggest points of all of this is lower your camera resolution. So this is the #1 tip that saved me 20% of my CPU usage. My camera was at 1080p. And I didn't even realize that for a little while. And of course, you scale it down to be like, maybe 1/6 of your screen. And it doesn't even need to be that much. It needs to be like way less. I'm maybe even, less than 1/6 of the screen, especially with my green screen behind me. But what the camera is capturing and putting on, compiling is about 1/6, if that. So I scaled mine all the way down to 480p, and man, did that make an instant difference. Not only did it fix any camera lag I had, but the CPU just dropped like crazy. I was super excited when I saw that. So do it yourself if you haven't yet. That will save you a whole bunch of CPU. That might be obvious to some, but it wasn't for me. I'm really glad that I figured it out and was able to properly get a green screen set up, because I wasn't even able to do so before. I was just having to use, any background elements that I had behind me, and just had to hope that chroma key was, an off distance feature until I eventually found this one. And you can change that by just heading to your camera and properties, and then right here, resolution. I changed mine all the way down to 480p, and as you can see, there's, my green screen behind me, and boy, was I glad I changed that. You also want to change it to 30 frames a second if you're struggling a lot with CPU. If you have a little bit of wiggle room, you might be able to put that up to 48. It just helps smooth things out a little bit more. But mine, I've got to stick with 30 frames a second. Video format, you probably want to leave at MJPEG. That's not how you say that, but it doesn't matter. You probably want to leave it there, but you might need to experiment to see what works best for you. So all of these is what got my stream to be able to finally coalesce and be able to stream. So hopefully some of these tips help you. Now, of course, you can skip some of them, or you might need to add your own. And if you have any more that I missed that have really helped you out with your CPU usage, leave them down in the comments below. For now, my name has been Lance the Timberwolf. Thanks so much for watching, and you can find me on Twitch and Twitter with the links below. For now, I'll see you guys next time.